As the Detroit Auto Show returns to its winter roots, we'll talk about where the industry stands during this time of transition, plus a preview of what to expect inside Huntington Place. Today is Sunday, January 5th, 2025. This is Flashpoint. Hi there, and welcome to Flashpoint. I'm Christy McDonald. Thanks so much for being with me on this Sunday. You know, it has been an eventful start to 2025, and I know you're sitting there with your coffee, all dressed up in your Lions gear, waiting for tonight's game against the Vikings. You know, we're just taking it week by week. I am still not totally used to January being prime time for Lions. And speaking of the January spotlight, the Lions will have to share it with the auto industry. The Detroit Auto Show is back this month after trying a September slot back in 22 and 23. The show name is different, the exhibits, focus, and outreach as well. Show co-chair Sam Clement will be here to talk about how strategic this revamped show really is. And that brings us to the bigger picture of how the auto industry as a whole is changing, where consumer demand is, streamlining technology and manufacturing, and how company CEOs are working with the new Trump administration, trying to figure out how incentives or tariffs could impact the bottom line. We've got some of the biggest brains in the auto analyst space here with me today. So it's kind of a gearhead's dream show. Stay put. Flashpoint starts right now. Let's start off with the transformation of the auto industry. So say hello to our panel this morning. John McElroy, longtime auto analyst and host of Autoline This Week. John, it's good to see you. Joanne Muller's also here. You read her reporting as the transportation correspondent at Axios. It's good to see you, Joanne. You. And with us always, Merrick Masters. He's a professor emeritus now at Wayne State's Mike Ilitch School of Business. He specializes in auto industry analysis, and he became my best friend during the strike. About a year and a half ago, we started having him on every day. So Merrick, it's good to see you as well.
Good to see you as well.
So let's jump into the new year. It has been a tumultuous several years for the auto industry, undergoing the biggest transformation they've seen. But when you step into 25 and you are heading up one of these companies, John, what are your two big concerns?
Well, first, fingers crossed, you know, 2024 didn't end too bad, at least in the U.S. market. 2025 could be better. But tariffs, number one. You know, how's that going to upset things? Dealing with China, because it's a global industry. But I think the main thing for operating in the U.S. is keep your fingers crossed that the economy keeps on churning.
And also when you start to think about what do consumers really want here and moving forward, is it EVs? Oh, are we backing off now, looking at hybrids, cars versus SUVs? But Joanne, give us your, I guess, mile-high view of when you are this auto industry and looking at beginning of this year, your biggest concerns.
Well, I think, you know, it's sort of a very ugly transformation that the industry is in the middle of right now. From consumers, they are still a little reluctant about EVs. And so this transformation is going to take longer than everyone thought. But I think the big three headwinds for the automakers are China, and by that I mean Chinese competition. I think the sort of the regulatory environment is a big one, not just the tariffs, but also the EV incentives and what's going to happen to those. And I think, you know, just what is Trump going to be like? You know, they've had some experience with him, but it's Trump 2.0, and it could be very different.
And I think, I'd like to get into that and talking about personalities and how the CEOs have really had to step up and intermesh with some of the different personalities in that way. But Merrick, let me ask you, and looking from the business perspective of what the industry is facing right now.
Well, I think there are three things that really are forward-looking. One is the center of gravity is shifting to Asia. 4 of the 5 leading car sales companies in the world are Asian. The transformation, as she said, to electrification is going to be more difficult. The auto companies haven't been able to sell as many, the big three, domestically in terms of EVs, and that hampers their productivity, profitability. And I think the third thing is that there's an opportunity under Trump for dramatically reducing the cost of doing business. And I think that there's one thing that can be done for businesses. And I put aside the tariffs. I think that's a negotiating play on his part that he's going to use, and he will use it bluntly if he has to. But I think a tax reform package that would substantially reduce the cost of doing business would be the best thing for the auto companies that he could possibly do.
When you look at all of the companies across the board, John, they all have to kind of see what does the consumer want. Have they done a good enough job at understanding what the consumer wants. We see them, consumers still going for SUVs. The car market may be shrinking a little bit. Are they staying, competitive to what people want, or have they figured it out?
Depends on the automaker, depends on the models. It's a mixed bag. So some automakers are getting it really, really well. General Motors is actually doing a pretty good job. It's been picking up market share. Toyota, year after year. I mean, it's right in there. Ford picked up some share in sales in 2024. Stellantis is a basket case. Nissan is a basket case. So, when you ask me how's it all going, you have to look at it literally, not just company by company, brand by brand, model line by model line.
What do you make of the drop in deliveries for Tesla in this fourth quarter?
Tesla's got an aging product line. I mean, you can over-the-air update this thing, so technologically it's right up to date. But styling-wise, these cars look the same that they did a decade ago. And they've had some mild facelifts, but only us in the industry can really spot them, or the hardcore Tesla fans can spot the differences. To the general public, they're the same. Also, it doesn't have very models. It's got 4 models plus the Cybertruck, and it needs a broader product line. To me, that's it. Oh, and the one thing is, there's no question that Elon Musk's political stance has turned off half the buyers that might have aspired to own the brand.
Joanne, you just spoke recently with Mary Barra and talking about how to keep up with the change of the industry and what consumers do want there and how they have to forecast out and look a little bit. What was your takeaway from speaking with her about how they're keeping up with some of the changes for consumer demand?
Well, I think that, they do very good research, right? And they're trying to satisfy 2 masters, right? The consumer, but also the federal government, because there are so many regulatory pressures. And so GM will always say consumer comes first, right? But they have to cater to the consumer while also balancing these government regulatory issues. So I would not want to be running one of these companies, frankly, because it is such a complex mix. But they are listening to what customers want. They're sticking to their guns on EVs, which is quite interesting. Other companies, Ford in particular, has backed off its EV plans. GM is keeping the accelerator down. We'll see which strategy works out better.
And also, I would also think about reliability. That's something that Ford specifically has really been touting that they are trying to work on to try to make sure the recalls and things like that people are going to keep coming back and buying the vehicle because they know they can depend on it.
Ford has had a very serious quality problem, a warranty problem over the last couple years, and it's kind of surprising to me that they still are grappling with it. Now, they will tell you they've improved things, but I feel like they still have a long way to go. And, long term, that can have an impact on a brand. So they've got to get it right.
Merrick, let me ask you about when we look at employment and we look at the labor force when it comes to a lot of these automakers now, and specifically we're looking at the ones in our own backyard. How has the labor agreements that are now in place right now, how do you see them either helping or hurting what's happening right now?
Well, I think they've been able to survive the labor agreements and that they will be able to absorb the costs. I think the more fundamental problem that they face is that they have not, in my judgment, listened to the consumers. They have listened to government. They have been regulated by government, and which is controlled by the past 4 years, the Democratic Party and the environmental zealots in that party that have forced a transition to EVs that the public hasn't wanted. And I think particularly GM and Ford overshot the runway when it came to EVs, and it overshot autonomous vehicles. And when I look at GM, and you look at its third quarter report, it's still touting its Cruise. It really has sunk billions of dollars into things that haven't panned out. So I have to look at myself and say they didn't listen to the consumers. Their investment decisions haven't been that smart. And when you look about the future of them, they can quibble here about whether their market shares goes up a little bit or not, but they are small players on the world stage, and they're going to get smaller.
What do you say to that, to John?
Totally agree. Look, when we grew up, pretty much, Merrick, you and I, General Motors was the largest industrial corporation in the world. Today, it's number 5. Ford is number 6, although we don't know. It may have just been surpassed by the Chinese automaker BYD. And if BYD maintains its current sales pace, it's got a good shot of surpassing General Motors this year. So, yeah, I would agree that To call them the Big Three is a misnomer. That's even calling them the Detroit Three. It's not the Detroit Three. It's the Detroit Two. You know, because Stellantis, let's hope that it hangs on, is a foreign-owned car company.
When you think about, though, I just want to fact check the GM. They have pulled back from their autonomous program, correct? In their you know, putting into
Yes, they have basically folded Cruise, which was their attempt to go for a separate robo-taxi company. They are taking some of that technology and folding it back into the company with the idea that you and I will have personal autonomous vehicles someday. In the meantime, it's heavily assisted. We'll see how all that pans out. I think the whole industry still is doing that and still wants to. We're going to see increasing autonomy, but boy, it's complicated to explain to drivers.
Well, you know, American, you said environmental zealots when you were talking about changing emissions and in trying to, you know, take on the climate crisis that we're facing here. But when you talk about going back and forth with changing administrations, I mean, that's what makes this so difficult for a company to be able to have strategy that goes out 10 years when you could have massively changing regulations.
Well, I think that's true. But the Democratic Party, and I say this as a lifelong Democrat, has moved so far to the left, and it's so regulatory in its approach to governing that we really, it's out of mainstream with the American people. And therefore, as long as it is captured by these groups and governs to that extent, you're going to see policies which are very, very much out of sync with what your typical American wants.
All right, so let's focus back here in Detroit, and we've got the auto show. Now, this is a very different auto show than we've experienced in years past, or the heyday when I was remembering Celine Dion singing from the rafters, and when you had the international media that would come in and you know, talk about you know, concept cars and new reveals. John, it still though brings people in and it makes it a massive showroom floor and potentially sells some vehicles for dealers.
It is, and in fact, this year's show starting to shape up to look pretty good for the public. They're going to bring in all kinds of entertainment, bands and other singing groups. They're going to bring in celebrities, especially I think you're going to see a lot of Detroit Lions down there at different times. They're bringing in famous cars from television shows. They're going to have classic cars there and exotic cars as well. So there's going to be a lot for the public to look at, and that's where I think auto shows are going. The big media extravaganza days, that's gone. But this could be a really good show for the public. And who knows, if give it time, nurture it and let it grow like it's going, it could become a vacation destination for some people if they do it right.
That's true, and it's also, I mean, it makes you think about marketing, Joanne, and how much things have changed because the, you know, car companies, they don't need an exhibit to be able to market their things. There's so many other ways to do it.
Well, that's so true, and I think we've seen that in the way cars are introduced. But I would come back to what John said, is that auto shows are for the people. And what do Detroiters need more in the middle of January is someplace to go.
Besides the Lions.
Well, we used to not have that. Now we do, so it's going to be a heck of a winter.
Yeah. Final thoughts out of you, Merrick.
Well, I think it's good that the auto show is back and coming back in a big sort of way, and whatever its benefits are in the future, I'm not certain. But I think that doesn't change the fundamental issue. I would much rather see a situation in which you had something significant to announce that was a technological breakthrough. If these companies don't come up with a technological breakthrough, whether it's to autonomous vehicles or electrical vehicles or production, then we're going to see more of the same old, and it's going to, the center of gravity is going to continue to move toward China, and we'll watch our industry shrink more and more. And then in the future, it has to become, why are you even having this big event? Because you're such a small part in the world stage.
Well, but people still love their cars, I have to say. We're going to have to leave it there. John McElroy and Joanne Muller and Merrick Masters, thanks so much for being with me. All right, stay put. What to expect at the auto show from co-chair Sam Clement. He's going to join me next. Stay with me. Welcome back. The auto industry is going through massive change, and so is the Detroit Auto Show. It's back in January, set to start next weekend. Gone are the days of its international label, concept cars, and major reveals. But the true feel of getting people close to vehicles that they could drive home is an auto dealer's dream. So with me now is co-chair Sam Clement, who will be taking over for longtime executive chair Rod Alberts next year. Sam, it's good to see you, and welcome to Flashpoint.
Thank you very much.
You know, when we launch into everything next week, this is a change show. It's back in January after trying in September a little bit something different. What was the thought about moving back to January?
January's home base. It's a natural fit for the auto show. It's where we've traditionally been. And September, a couple of years ago, came kind of out in the wake of COVID and trying more things outside. But there's also a lot of attention that's taken away during September in Michigan, right? People are still going up north. There's a lot of football games. Football games are the big one. People, you know, school's starting back up. And so there's just a lot to do. In January, right after the holiday, it's a good way to start the year, get some momentum for the city going. And it's a natural fit for the city.
When you walk into looking at the Detroit Auto Show now and the different things that you can do with it, knowing that it has been such an amazing event, and it was the North American International Auto Show, and how it's changed over the years, what were some of the deliberate decisions that you and Rod were making about making this show different and acknowledging and saying, hey, it isn't the auto show of the past, but it's something a little different?
Yeah, different, and I think in a lot of ways better. I mean, the experiential opportunities for consumers to come down and actually get into the vehicles, right? So you're not only walking, seeing the cars on carpet, but you're actually able to ride. And we have 4 ride and drive tracks, which is the most that we've ever had. We have the Powering EV experience, the Powering Michigan EV experience, so that's all EV vehicles. But then we have this partnership with the Grand Prix, and we've created another track with them where you can see your ICE, hybrid, and EV vehicles. So we have 4 tracks, more than 40 different vehicles that people can ride in, so it's very experiential.
You know, when you look at the auto show floor, and I've been going to the auto show for many, many years, you know, it is an auto dealer's dream in terms of saying, here are so many different cars that you can see next to each other that you never usually get when you're shopping for a car and you're on a lot. When you see people able to get up closer, what are some of the, I think, sometimes misperceptions about certain kinds of cars that they're able to then have them all in a row and take a look at?
Yeah, I mean, there's 700,000 square feet plus at Huntington Place, and to have, you know, 30 plus brands underneath that roof, you can kind of, you can test and consumer compare. You know, if you're looking for a new vehicle, you can see what fits best for you and your family. You don't get that everywhere, as you mentioned. You can't do that at a showroom floor. This is a chance to broaden that, and I think that that's an exceptional piece. Like, that really makes the experience better for everyone because, again, you can see all this in a 2-hour time frame.
You know, in talking with our panel that we had on just before, and John McElroy, is that, you know, gone are the days of, you know, there's no more, a lot of the international auto shows that happen in Frankfurt and Geneva, those shows don't exist anymore. You know, was there ever a point where, you know, dealers say, hey, maybe the Detroit Auto Show should not exist anymore, that this is something that's different and gone? We can now see things on our phones. The industry can market cars in a different way.
We're the Motor City, and if we can't tell the automotive story, who can? And so I think there will always be a place for our show. Now, what that show looks like, I think it'll evolve year to year. And I think that's the exciting part of it for the city. You know, to be able to have, you know, we still have international media that's coming from more than a dozen countries to come in because they know this is where conversations happen. So it's not only seeing the vehicles, it's having the conversations that move the industry forward, and that's an essential piece. And this is a huge part economically for the city as well. I mean, to have these people come from all over to see these vehicles, we're raising hundreds of millions of dollars in economic impact. And I think that that's something that will always be a central part of our show.
Yeah, I mean, you talked a little bit about how there's a little bit more outreach. Talk about how you say, oh, we should try this idea, or we should partner up with this organization.
We've created some great partnerships this year alone. Obviously, I referenced the Grand Prix earlier, which is a great partnership. The Michigan Science Center, they're bringing an exhibit for kids to get their hands on some stuff about building cars, and they're even bringing a planetarium. So just a lot of things to do for the whole family. We want to make sure that when people come down there, they're not just seeing and looking, they're engaging and they're touching things and they're really getting involved in the industry. And that, I think, is something that you'll see continue to evolve year after year. When
you bring, I think sometimes, you know, when there's new leadership and fresh eyes to an event like that, what are some of the pitfalls that you could say, oh gosh, we probably shouldn't do this? Or do you plan on taking, after this year is done, and reassessing and saying, this can change, this can morph? We can say, yeah, we're not going to do that, we're going to try something else.
I think that's true of anything, right? And you know, Rod Alberts has done an incredible job for the last 34 years. He's created he was one it is, I would argue, still one of the greatest conventions that we have in the country, not just auto related. We have great leadership with Carl Zimmerman as our chairman and Todd Zott as our board chair. And so I think we just having those conversations with those individuals, Rod will still stick around. He'll still be there as someone that I can turn to for guidance. But yeah, there's gonna be things that don't work, and we'll say, okay, we tried that. That's no longer needed. But then we're gonna build on the things that do work, and I think we're finding a lot of those new opportunities.
Okay, so we got the charity preview that's going to be happening on Friday night, which again makes so much money for Detroit charities.
Yeah, we've raised $125 million plus over the last 30 years for local Michigan's charities, Detroit area charities, which is huge. I mean, that's generational impact for those kids that are involved in those organizations. And so we want to keep that momentum going. It's always cool to come down, you get dressed up, you put the black tie on, you put the fur coat on, but the impact that it has is so critical for the city. And we can have some fun doing it. Okay,
talk to like a family of 4 who wants to go and some of the highlights that they should see and how much it's going to cost them.
So a family pack, which actually gets you 5 tickets, is $50. So we think that's relatively affordable. If you have an individual adult, it's $20. If you are a senior, it's $12, and a kid's ticket is $10. When you walk into the door this year, you're going to feel an energy. I really believe that. I think you're going to hear music. You're going to see it's going to be visually appealing. There's going to be screens everywhere. There's going to be engagement of all types. There's going to be simulators. You'll feel an energy when you walk into the building. And, for a cold January day, it's hard to beat.
And it's one of those things that usually, in Detroit and Michigan, there's not a lot to do in January. So to have the auto show back to be able to do that. So you came from the Michigan Association of Broadcasters. Are you a car guy, Sam?
I am a car guy. And I say that, relatively. There are much more, there are stronger car enthusiasts than I will.
Hey, you can say that you're a car guy if you just love the 4 wheels that you're driving on.
I will say
right
this.
now.
I'm from this area. My grandfather worked for General Motors for 30 years. I know what this industry means to this community and to this city. And so I love what the impact it's had. So I'm becoming more and more of a car guy every single day. I'll say that.
And that's what I think it's so, interesting, or we just really can't forget that everyone is touched in some way, shape, or form by the auto industry, whether it's this television station and the advertisement that's on the air, or people who are actually working, or the parts and the technology that is going into these vehicles. That we can't forget that. It's going to be a good week. So you're going to be able to take a deep breath after this is all done, eh?
Yeah, well, I think so. We want to be a show that has a presence 365 days a year. So maybe a little breath, but then hit the ground running for 2026 and beyond.
All right, looking forward to it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate
it's good to see you.
You as well.
We'll be right back. Stay with me. All right, for all my speed demons, car lovers, and collectors out there, we will be covering the auto show next week, including a special with the charity preview live on Friday night. And for those of you who just can't get enough of cars, that's me. I have a streaming series called What's in That Garage. You can check it out at Click on Detroit and Local 4 Plus. We discover the cool cars that collectors are stashing away in garages across Michigan and hear the stories. That's a good one. That is going to do it for Flashpoint this week. Have a great weekend. Go Lions. And I'll see you next week. Take care.